Hello friends, today I am going to cover the top 10 REST API interview questions. If you are new to REST API, then don't miss them, and if you are experienced, then revise these questions at least one time. Hey, my name is Happy and I help candidates in cracking interviews. So let's start with the first question.
And yes, for a real interview experience, first hear the question, pause the video, then think about your own answer, then play my answer and compare it with yours.
What are REST and RESTful API? Let's quickly understand with the help of a diagram which you might already know, but let's revise quickly. A user first opens the browser and enters the application URL, right? Then a request will be sent to the UI server, which is mostly created in React, Angular using CSS, HTML, JavaScript. Okay. Then the UI server can process the static HTML by itself. But for the dynamic data, it will send the request to the server side API. And this REST API can be created in Node.js, Java, .NET, etc. Then this API will fetch the data from the database and send the response in JSON format back to the UI server. Okay, and the UI server will process it into HTML and send it to the user browser. Okay, so that's the process, and now you know this server side application we call the REST API and sometimes backend application also. So what is the meaning of REST here? Here REST, which stands for representational state transfer. It's an architectural style for designing the network applications. Or you can say that REST is like a guideline, set of guidelines for creating the APIs. Okay. Now here the meaning of this representational state transfer means transferring of data accurately in a network. That's the like meaning, 99% synonymous. Okay, so finally, what is RESTful API then? So a RESTful API is a service that follows the REST principles or guidelines. Okay, here it is written. REST API and RESTful API are the same things. Okay, great. Now you know what is REST, and now you want to know what are the REST guidelines, right? That I will cover in upcoming question. What is the difference between REST API and SOAP API? Some years ago, before REST APIs, SOAP APIs were very popular. Okay, now let's quickly see the differences between them based on the features. First is architecture based difference. Remember, REST is an architectural style. Okay, whereas SOAP is a protocol, simple object access protocol. It's not an architectural style. Second difference is REST API uses HTTP or HTTPS protocol only, whereas SOAP API can use various protocols like HTTP, SMTP, etc. Next is REST API uses lightweight formats like JSON XML only, whereas SOAP API typically uses XML. Okay. Then next is REST API are stateless, you know it, whereas SOAP API can be stateful or stateless also. Depends. Next is REST API relies on HTTP status codes like 200, 201, etc. Whereas SOAP API define its own fault mechanism. Okay, every SOAP API will can define its own different. So that's a problem actually. Now I'm going the last difference between them, because of which SOAP API are very popular nowadays. Sorry, REST API are very popular nowadays, and that is REST API are generally lightweight and faster, whereas SOAP API can be slower due to XML processing. Okay, all right. These were some differences between these two. What? All right, friends. Before moving to the next question, if you have not yet accepted the Never Give Up challenge, then accept it. Promise yourself you will never give up until you crack the interview. Start and accept this challenge by writing never give up in the comments right now and feel the confidence. What are HTTP verbs and HTTP methods? We already know this flow from the browser to UI server to API server to database, right? Already know. Now, whenever a request goes from UI server to REST API, it also contains the HTTP verbs. And here are those HTTP verbs or HTTP methods also. They are both same things. These get, post, put, delete, patch methods. These are HTTP verbs. Now, basically, along with the URL only, this type of action will go. Okay. So, for example, the request should get data from the API or post and submit data to the API. For that, we will use these HTTP methods. I am telling you like in which scenarios. Okay, so by looking at these verbs name, you can easily identify their purpose also, right? And here is a very simple definition of HTTP methods. HTTP methods, also known as HTTP verbs, are a set of action that a client can take on a resource. In the upcoming question, I will show you the role of these HTTP methods with an example also. Okay. What are the get, post, put, and delete HTTP methods? Let's quickly see all these methods with the definitions and the examples. The first one is get method, which is used to retrieve data from a specified resource. For example, if this is the HTTP request URL and HTTP request method is get here, then a list of all the users will be retrieved from the REST API as a response. Remember, in this case, users are the resource. Okay. Also, with this get method, you can retrieve the details of a single users also by passing this user ID in the URL like this. Then the second is the post method, which is used to submit data which has to be processed. For example, this is the same URL as of above the get request, right? But this time the request method will post data instead of get. And also in the request body, there will be the data of the user sent by the UI server. Okay. In a so basically in a get method request, the request body can be empty or it's optional, but in post you will send some data to the server. Okay. The third HTTP method is put, which is used to update a resource or create a new resource if it does not exist. For example, if this is the request URL and the request method is put here, it means the user of this ID is already present in the database, and now you are basically replacing that existing user detail with the details which are you now sending in the request body with the put request. Okay, got it? And yes, if the user is not there, then it will create the new user. Okay. Finally, we have the delete method, and as its name suggests, it will remove a resource user. For example, if this is the user ID 123, then this will be deleted from the user resources or from the database. And here your request body is optional. Great. This is the idea of the top 4 HTTP methods. And if you look closely here, then the URL can be same. Okay, you can see the URL can be same of the two request, but the action method is different. So always the action will be taken based on the URL plus action method combined. Okay, URL alone can't decide the action. Okay. What is the difference between the put and the patch methods? Now there is one more HTTP method, and that is patch method. I am covering it separately because it is slightly confusing with the put method, which confusion I will clear now. First thing is, what is the similarity between put and patch? Okay, and here it is. Both put and patch methods are used to update a resource by replacing the resource with the new data provided in the request. I hope it's clear to you already. Now, what is the difference? Let me explain with the help of this code. For example, this is your put request URL and put request body. Okay, this request body received from the client should have all the details of the user resource, because put will do a complete resource replacement. Complete. Okay, now listen carefully. Here is the patch URL and patch request body. Here the URL is same, but in patch request body the client will only send those fields that needs modification, not all the fields. Okay. For example, in this case, we only want to update the email and age of this user 123. So this will not impact other fields of the user. It's not a complete update. Okay, it's just a partial update. Great. In short, patch method, as I said, will do a partial resource update and not will do the complete resource update like the put method. And that's the answer, and the same difference I have written here also, so that your last minute revision just before the interviews will be very quick and fast. Hi friends, just a small notification. This video is part of my full course, Top 200 Node Interview Questions, which includes Express, REST and MongoDB questions also. All questions PDF book link is present below in the description. So like these candidates, if you don't want to miss anything for your interviews, then try it. Otherwise, no problem. Let's continue. Explain the concept of idempotence in RESTful API. And this is not a very important question, but some students says that they have been asked in interview, so let's understand it. Idempotent is sorry for my pronunciation, it's idempotent or idempotent, I don't know. So idempotent is a concept that guarantees that performing the same operation multiple times will always give the same output, same response, same result. Okay, so the word is hard but the purpose meaning is easy. Okay, for example, see here. See, if you send this get method request 100 times again and again, the result will always be the same. Okay, you will get the response with the users list, right? Same result. Now, similar to get, we have the put and delete methods also. Those are also idempotent. Okay. Now, put because if you send to update the same request body again and again, so every time the same replacement will happen and the result will be same. So that is idempotent. Now, what is non-idempotent methods? For example, this post method. Because if you send multiple post requests with the same request body, then each time a new user with a new user ID will be created in the database, right? That means the result has been changed, it is impacted, and it every time it will impact, it's different. Okay, great. That is the explanation of this concept, and the same thing is written here also, which I already explained, right? What is the role of status codes in RESTful APIs? Here is the simple answer. Status codes are used to convey the results of a client request. So for example, whenever a request is sent from the client to the API server, that request on API server can be success, fail, unauthorized, etc., etc., right? Then to inform the result to the client, REST API send the status codes. Okay, so suppose client send one request to the API and API send a response with a status code starting like this one. That means the response is just informational, nothing important here. Okay, it's informational. Then if the response status code API starts with 2, then that means client request was a success on the server, API server. If a status code response is starting with 3, that means client request was redirected somewhere else. Okay, again it is not so important and it's very less used. Then if the response stated codes starts with 4 or 5, that means client request was rejected, and or you can say fail. Okay, great. Now here are all the status codes also. Out of all these codes, the most important one is 200, which means the request was successful, and there can be some content also in the response from the API server. Okay. Second important one is 204, which means again the request is successful, but in the response there is no content from the API server to the client. Okay. The next important status I will say is 400, which means client request has some problems. Okay, client request has some problems that I think most probably UI developers will fix because they are sending the request, right? For example, incorrect request format or incorrect data type they are sending in the request from the UI. Okay, 401 error means user or request is not at all authorized. Okay, it is related to authorization. 403 error means user is authorized, request is authorized, but it is maybe forbidden for some other resource. Like for some resource of API it is authorized, but not for others. For them, 403 errors will be sent. Then 404 means the resource the request is looking for is actually not found. It is not present in the REST API. Maybe the client is using the wrong resource name they are asking for. Okay, this is about the errors. Then we have 500 status code, which means there is some error, but that is not due to client request. Request is fine, but maybe there is some connection, internet issue, the server is down, API server is down. So this is the difference between these 400 and 500 also. In 400 cases, failure mostly because of client request. In 500 cases, failure is because of API servers, maybe not client request. Great. That is the, I think, the most complete answer of this question, right? What is codes in RESTful APIs? Very important question and asked in many interviews. Let's explore it. The first very important thing to remember is that codes is a security feature provided by the web browsers like Chrome, Edge, etc. And as per this security feature, suppose you are a user and you open this website interviewhappy.com. Now, from inside this website, you want to access the different pages or components of this same website like this. In this case, you will receive the data smoothly and without any problems. Okay. But, if you try to access the data of the different website like xyz.com, then by default, codes policy of the browser will restrict and will not allow this. Okay, this is codes, which stands for cross origin resource sharing, which means web pages from cross origin websites, meaning from different websites or domain, cannot share resources, meaning cannot share data. Okay. All right. So similar to this one case, we have three more cases where the codes will not allow the sharing of the data. For example, in this second case, you want to get the response from a subdomain. Subdomain like API dot before interviewhappy.com. Okay, that is subdomain. In this case also, by default, codes will not allow resource sharing. Third case is when the domain or website name is same, but you are requesting from HTTP, but the sender is HTTPS. Then also codes will restrict data sharing. And the last case is if the port number is different, then also codes will restrict. Remember, this is the default behavior of course restrictions. But yes, sometimes as a developer, we have to allow the data sharing between different domains, right? In those cases, we have to suppress and remove this code security in our API code, which I will show you in upcoming question. Finally, here I have written the simplest definition of codes, which I already explained, but writing it here so that your last minute preparation just before the interviews will be very quick and fast. Explain the concept of versioning in RESTful APIs. Yes, like we get new versions of mobile phones and softwares with the time, same is the case with the APIs also. With time, as per the new requirements, we create a new version like this 3 version of our REST APIs, and then now maintaining all these old and new version is called versioning. Now you must might ask one question: why we are maintaining these old version 1 2 of these REST API? Why just we can dispose them or destroy them? See, suppose we created this version 3 latest of our API and we did some changes here, okay, from version 2 API methods. But then maybe some of our API clients are not yet ready to accommodate those new changes of the version 3. Maybe they do not have the developers budget or for any other reason, okay? So in that case, if we maintain the previous version of the API, then client can keep using the previous version 1 and 2 of the API, and therefore the client application will not break because of the latest version changes in 3 version. So like this, the client applications can use the URLs based on their requirement, which version they want. For different version, different URLs can be there. Okay, now you clear, right? And here is the definition. Versioning in the RESTful APIs refers to the practice of maintaining multiple versions of an API to support backward compatibility. That's it. What is token-based authentication and JWT authentication? Nowadays, this is the most popular kind of authentication technique used in REST APIs. Here, token-based authentication is a type of authentication, and when we use JWT as the token in token-based authentication, then that is JWT authentication. And you can also say like JWT authentication is a type of token-based authentication also. Okay, so JWT stands for JSON Web Token. For interviews, this JWT authentication process is very important, and that I'm going to explain here. And here are first the main players in the authentication process. First is our browser, which will act as the front end, you can say, also front end, you can think of it. And then we have the REST API in Node, which you can also call middleware, server side, back end. Okay, now there are 8 steps in this authentication process of JWT. First, user will from the client side send the username and password through the browser and send them to the API with a post request. Now, of course, I'm not saying that browser will send to the client and client will send to the server. Basically, both will together will send to the API server. Okay. Then, in the second step, the API will receive these credentials, right? And they will authenticate, or you can say validate those username and password, whether it is valid or not. If credentials are valid, a JWT token will be created and that will be sent back to the client as a response. Clear? Now, if the credentials are not valid, it will not return, API server will not return an JWT token, rather a authentication error will be written. Then as a next step, the client will store this JWT token in the local storage or in the cookies of the browser. Okay, now listen carefully. When the JWT token is stored, then for every future or subsequent request for the data from client, this token will be sent in the header of every request to the REST API from the client. Okay, got my point? Token will go every time. Username and password are will not go then. So now when the API will receive the token, it will check and validate the token signature with the help of some algorithm. And if the token is valid, valid means it must be the same JWT token which initially the API has sent to the client. Okay. And if it is valid, then only the API will send the data to the client. Great. Finally, the client will display the data in the browser, and that is the whole process which I make simpler for you. And that's the reason why for any website we have to enter username password only once, because after first time you will receive the token, and then only the token will be sent for the validation, not the username and password again and again. Okay, so this is the working of JWT token authentication. And yes, there are other authentication techniques also, but this is the most popular one, and that is the answer to this question, the steps and the explanation. Okay, congratulations for completing all the questions. As I always said, most students study to just learn, but you don't have to just learn, you also have to crack the interview. And facing interviews need courage. For that courage and spirit, all the best from my side. And yes, if you have not yet accepted the never give up challenge until you crack the interview, then accept the challenge now by writing never give up in the comment section. And yes, don't forget to like and subscribe the channel. Thank you.